Who is ExoMatter? ExoMatter was founded in 2022 in Munich as a spin-off from the German Aerospace Center. The founders are Dr. Josua Vieten and Barbara Bachus. Dr. Josua Vieten is obviously our speaker here today. And what is ExoMatter? Most of you, or some of you, will be fully aware of who we are and what we do. But for those who aren't, we have a product called the ExoMatter Platform for Materials Research and Development. It is geared to any material scientists in any industries, currently excluding health and pharma. You see some of our customers listed here with which we've had considerable projects and who've enjoyed the benefits of finding materials with us. Our speaker today is Dr. Josua Vieten. He's our CEO and co-founder at ExoMatter. And he's a chemist and material scientist by trade and has spent time at the German Aerospace Center and at Celonis. Just before we dive into the actual session, quick note. So this webinar is being recorded and we'll make the recording available to you or any colleagues of yours should you be interested after that. And if you have any questions during the sessions, please type them in the Q&A window and we'll try and get to them towards the end of the session. And with that, I hand over to Josua. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Claudia, for the kind introduction. So yeah, my name is Josua Vieten, and I will guide you through our all-new platform today. So those of you that are familiar with us and have been working with us for some time know also our old product, and we have launched our new product in October, so just recently. So I'm very excited and very proud of what the team has put together, and I will share this with you now. So I will share my screen. And you should be able to see this now. This is the landing page that you get once you enter our platform. Each customer of ours gets their own area, which is sealed off to any other customers. That's very important. Data security and data privacy. Of course, we're dealing with your R&D. And each of you gets this own subdomain. Of course, we have now our internal subdomain here. So what can you do on the platform? The whole idea of our platform is to be able to search for new or alternative materials specifically targeted to your use cases. And you can start a search here and get to the material screening page. And then you see a bunch of options here. We have the goal to make this as easy as possible for you. So what we do is we give you different options of defining your search criteria. So the default option is that you just define the chemical elements that you want in your material and that you don't want in your material. You define the properties that you're looking for, and then you start the search. And I will show you two examples today that are relevant for a lot of different customers of ours and a lot of people in the industry. One example will be on battery materials, and the other example will be on catalysts. But the possibilities of the platform are endless. So these are just two examples out of many possible examples. So if you're interested in talking about your specific use case, then we're happy to set up a call with you and go through that with you. For now, the focus of the platform is on inorganic materials, as you have seen in the announcement of the webinar. So we're dealing with inorganic crystalline materials. We are expanding the platform more and more over time, so stay tuned for that. There will be a lot more coming, but we believe that for the inorganic materials, we have already made tremendous progress in a really easy-to-use platform. So here on the search page, you can then define the chemical elements that you want to have in your material. So let's do that for one example. Before I start with that, one side note, as I said, we want to make it as easy as possible. So there's also the option to use a preset here and use that to define your search criteria in case you don't know where to start. So for instance, you can find materials with high stiffness or low density and high mechanical strength. That's all possible. And also these presets are being extended more and more. So that's just one more option to make it as easy as possible. And now let's go ahead and dive into the first use case of the lithium-ion battery materials, specifically cathode materials. So we're going to search for some very well-known materials today, just to show you that our platform is able to find those materials very easily. But of course, you can also dive into more exotic material candidates, and we're also going to do that today. So we're looking now at a cathode material for lithium-ion batteries, and in the last couple of years, what has become very popular are lithium iron phosphate materials for cathodes. And what we're going to do today is we're looking for lithium iron phosphate and related materials, and then we're trying to find alternatives for this material. So for that, let's go ahead and edit the choice of chemical elements. And now if we do that, we can open a periodic table of the elements and select anything that we want to have in there. You can also select group of chemical elements to not have to click everything at the same or everything after another. What we're going to do now is we're going to look for lithium, iron, phosphorus, and oxygen to find lithium iron phosphate and related materials. We're going to use those. And we say that we need all of these contained in our target material. We can also exclude chemical elements. And for doing that, we get basically the same interface. And then we can exclude anything that we don't want to have in our target material at all. So what most of our customers do, of course, is to exclude radioactive materials. Of course, there's some use cases where you want them, but in most use cases you don't. So now we have selected radioactive materials to exclude them. And there we go. Here you have some more options on how to search in the computational databases that we use as a basis for then conducting our own calculations. So I'm going to skip over that for now. But there are different base data sources that you can use. And then you need to, of course, select the properties that you're interested in. So for our lithium ion batteries, or for our lithium ion battery materials, what we're going to include is the cost. So you click on the add property and you get a range of different properties that you can select. We have grouped them into business and sustainability properties, including cost, carbon footprint, for instance, but also literature reference and patents, a lot of chemical properties, physical properties, and engineering properties. And once you add a property, you have different options on how to handle these materials properties. So there is a default option here, which in the case of cost, will just give those materials that have the lowest cost the highest score. So we have set the default for each of the properties, but you can also say, I want to start with a certain value of cost and increase and only have materials that have an increased cost from there or a decreased cost from there. You can also select a certain target value and a certain tolerance around it. You can also select that you only want to display the material and not give it any score or display the property, or that you want to customize everything. So that's also possible, and there is some help and some further material on how to do that specifically. But for now, we're just going to use the defaults. So we want the cost, and then of course, what's most relevant for cathode material in a lithium-ion battery is the capacity of that. So for that, we look at the lithium gravimetric battery capacity in milliamp hours per gram. And then we select two more properties, just as an example of what is possible to do. For instance, let's use the density and let's use the band gap of the material. The band gap gives an indication, a rough indication at least, of the conductivity of the material. So that's also relevant for applications in our cathode materials. And then we can name our search so that we can find it again. So let's just name it lithium, iron, phosphorus, and oxygen. Now let's check if we have defined everything, the case. Then we start the search. And then you get to this page where you find all your searches that you have ever done, unless you delete them. So this is individual for each user. You can see that, of course, I have done a lot of them. And now your search is queued and running. And once you refresh the page, you see if it's finished, and you see that it's already finished. So our platform is extremely fast. Most searches are finished within seconds. You go here, and now you find your result. You find 266 materials that contain your target elements, and we have listed the different properties here. So here you find chemical formula of the materials, and then here you find all the properties that we have just selected. And here you find the so-called ExoMatter score. And to explain what the ExoMatter score is, we are going to search for our most well-known material here, which is lithium iron phosphate. So you can search by a chemical formula here and get your material. And then you can also see already the gravimetric capacity. To those of you that worked on this material, that value should look familiar. And if we click on that material, we can see, first of all, our values again, and I'm going to dive deeper into those in a minute as well. And you can also see the scoring here. So by default, a material that has the lowest cost, so the lowest cost in our result list, will get a score of 10, and the highest cost will get a score of 0. So this is pretty close to the optimum already. Then with the battery capacity, it's the other way around. The higher the capacity is, the higher the score. And here you can see the scores visualized, and you can quickly see which strengths and which weaknesses the material has. So this one is very cheap compared to a lot of the others, but in gravimetric battery capacity, there are others that have a higher capacity. If you expand this here, you can also find further details on that specific property. In this case, how the maximum capacity was modeled, and also other chemical reactions that can occur that have a lower capacity that have also been calculated. Then the total score here is calculated as a weighted average of all the scores for each of these different properties. And you can modify how those are weighted here. So for instance, if you say, I care more about the cost than anything else, and you can increase the weight of the cost and watch what happens here to the total score. Now, the total score of this one increases because it has a much lower cost than the other ones. And we can, of course, use the score to sort our table. So the idea is that if you define your parameters, then the best materials for your specific use case will always show up on top. And if your requirements change, for instance, you care more about the performance or more about the cost, then the sorting of the table changes. Of course, you can also sort by all of these other properties here and filter them as you please. Now, I've shown you what to do with a simple search and which kind of materials you can find here and what all of these properties mean. Now, let's say we want to start from this material and we want to search for alternatives. So we want to find materials that have a higher gravimetric battery capacity than the one that we're looking at. And for that, you click on search for alternatives. And what you then find is the start page again. And now let's say we want to have materials with that contain, let's say, lithium and oxygen. And we want to only have rather complex materials so that contain a lot of different chemical elements, let's say minimum of 4 here, to include other metals, because otherwise we just get lithium and oxygen. We want to exclude radioactive materials again. And then for the properties, we can select the same properties again. Let's say we want to look at the gravimetric battery capacity. And now we can say we want to increase it. If we click on increase here, then we get materials that have a minimum of the same value that we just found for this material. So this is already pre-filled now. For the cost, we can say we want to have something close to it, similar to it. To not exclude it too much, we're gonna just give us a very high tolerance here. So that means that costs 500% above that will still be counted. And then for the other properties, let's say you look at the density and band gap again. Let's say we just want to display them and not make them affect our score. Then we have lithium iron phosphate alternatives here already pre-filled. We start the search, and then this is running again. And again, this is finishing within a second. And now we have a lot of different materials. Of course, we can further refine that. Maybe we don't want to have some very exotic ones with hydrogen in here. But now what you can see is the minimum capacity is the one of lithium iron phosphate. And then you find alternatives here that have similar cost, but higher capacity. So for instance, some here with these transition metals in there. That goes to show you how quickly you can find alternatives to your existing material. And of course, you cannot just do this with the gravimetric capacity, but with any of the properties, you can use an existing material and improve upon the existing material. Because we have found that a lot of materials data repositories lack this ability. You need to know very precisely already what you're looking for to find your material. But most of you don't always develop new materials. Most of you already have a material for your product. And for whatever reason, you need to improve it. And that's why we have built this function to quickly identify alternatives to existing materials. So now I have shown you a lot on this one example of the lithium iron phosphate material. Let's also dive into another example, just to show you the versatility of the platform and to also show you one other property that I haven't, or function that I haven't touched upon at all, which is enrich properties. And yeah, I just show it to you because this is something that nobody else has in the world currently. So if we start a new search, let's now search for catalyst materials. And of course, catalysts can be very broad in their function and the way catalysts work. For those of you that are chemists, know that a lot of catalysts work in a lot of different ways. What we are going to look at are catalysts that work using oxygen vacancies. So at high temperature, those materials release some oxygen, form vacancies on the surface, and then they can react with whichever gas we have that we want to split, for instance, or with whichever material that we want to react with. So for that, I will just use an example of calcium manganese oxides. And that's one that we know that works quite well for this application. And of course, you can keep the search also broader if you want to. Let's say our material must contain calcium, manganese, and oxygen, and anything else is optional above that. And let's just do the radioactive exclusion again. Just to show you also, you can, for instance, exclude conflict minerals. If you want to, you can exclude rare earths. So there are a lot of options for exclusions here. So we're going to use that. We can say we want to have at least 3 elements, but it doesn't make a difference here because we already have 3 elements that need to be contained. And then for the properties, initially, we just searched for some very generic ones because what we want to do is goes much further than that. So for the first search, we just include the cost and we include something that tells us the thermodynamic stability of the material. So how stable is it regarding decomposition, called energy above Hull. And then we're going to include, just as an example for engineering properties that we can have, Young's modulus, which gives you an idea of the stiffness of the material. We just leave everything at default and we say, okay, I want to have my calcium manganese oxide and want to search based on that. Just quickly verify that we have everything. We do. We start the search. Now this is running. And also within seconds. This is all live here, so things can, of course, go wrong, but they very rarely do because our platform is very robust. Find our calcium manganese oxides in a few seconds. There we go. All right. And now we have 471 materials that contain calcium, manganese, and oxygen, plus further chemical elements. We see the cost, energy above hull, and Young's modulus here. But you would now ask yourself, of course, how is this related to catalysts? Because so far we have just found materials, but we haven't really looked at the catalytic properties. And for that, we can do our special magic, which is called enrich properties. So what this does is, here you find a lot of additional materials properties that require user input. So those are not pre-calculated in our database, but those work based on your specific inputs to match exactly your operating parameters and your use case. So how we can do that is, I just said we want to look at oxygen vacancy formation, or like materials that have reductions that enable the reaction. And for that, we have this reactions and Gibbs functions, which calculates the Gibbs free energy of a chemical reaction. And we take whichever material we have in our list, and we can define a reactant that the material should react with. In this case, we leave it empty because the material should just react with itself, basically, and create oxygen as a side product. So we type in O2 here, and we want to know which of those materials reacts at 800 degrees C and under an oxygen partial pressure of 1 millibar. So you can define your parameters very precisely here. And additionally, we want to know how much energy does it take to heat up the material. So for that, we can use the specific heat capacity, and we can calculate the specific heat capacity at 800 degrees C. Or maybe we want to calculate it as a lower temperature because 800 degrees C is just the maximum that we reach in the end. We can define whatever we want here. You see that there are some other options here as well. For instance, gravimetric battery capacity. You can also find this on the front page, but here you can use different active elements, not just lithium. Or you can look at thermal expansion coefficients, anything that requires your input. And now we say, okay, I want to look at those catalysts, see if everything is defined. Looks like it. And now we start the enrichment. And now this will not happen within seconds because there's a lot more going on now. This will take around 2 to 3 minutes. But this is still extremely fast. Now, all of the 471 materials that we just had in our results, on our server, what is happening now is that we iterate over all of these materials. And for each of the materials, we look at all possible reactions that lead to the release of oxygen and another new material. So we iterate over thousands and 10,000s of different chemical reactions in a very fast time. This is running through very quickly. And then all of the reactions that actually work are being kept and are being stored. And all of the reactions that don't work are being discarded. And for those reactions where the data is being kept, we calculate the delta G, the Gibbs free energy, based on the enthalpy. So we calculate the enthalpy change from product to EDUCT, and also, from EDUCT to product. And also we calculate the change in entropy using a machine learning model. Both of those combined give us the Gibbs free energy. So there's a lot going on in the background, but we have very powerful servers that you have access to if you are one of our users. Let's see if it's already done. Not yet, but it should be done in a minute or so. So we are the only ones, as far as I know, and I've seen a lot of companies in this area. We are the only ones that can do that. I can do material screening based on your inputs and based on the reaction parameters so quickly. Yeah, now it's ready. So that was extremely fast. And now what you can see is for all of these materials, you see your delta G and your heat capacity. So one of the most well-known ones is calcium manganese oxide. You can see that delta G here is positive, so it means that 800 degrees C and 1 millibar is not enough to completely reduce this material. But there are some other ones where it is enough. So what we can do then is we want to know all materials where the reaction occurs spontaneously. We define a maximum of 0 here. And yeah, then we can see which kind of materials react. Here, this one just barely reacts at this temperature. And then we can also look at which chemical reaction occurs here that leads to the release of oxygen. And we can also look at details on a specific heat capacity. So by the way, this is based also on machine learning model partially and partially on just physical calculations that run on our platform. So we calculated the by temperature. Based on that, we calculate the specific heat capacity of this material at the specific temperature that you have defined. Yeah, so yeah, you can see now we have filtered 39 results out of those 471 materials that were in the list where the reaction can occur. And you can see a lot of mixed strontium, calcium, manganese, iron oxides, but also some more exotic variants like this calcium, magnesium, titanium, manganese oxide. Very complex material indeed, but that's the strength of this platform, that we can identify very targeted, very complex materials very quickly. So with that, I will end my demo here and give the floor back to Claudia. Thanks very much for watching.
Thank you very much, Josua. I've seen this demo a few times now. I still learn a lot of new things. Thank you ever so much. And I can encourage the audience again to post some questions into the Q&A that we're happy to answer here. And Josua, I think we still had 1 or 2 slides to finish off.
Yes, thank you very much for the reminder. I will share the screen and show these slides.
So just to remind you again, this webinar is recorded. You'll get a link to that either today or tomorrow, so you can look at it again or share it with colleagues. We are here at ExoMatter in Munich, a very small, very dynamic, fast-growing team, and we obviously believe that materials are the key to a more sustainable world. If you're interested in our platform, you should be aware that we're selling it as in a SaaS model, which means on an annual basis as a subscription model. And we'll be very happy to discuss your specific projects with you in a one-to-one after this call or in the coming weeks. And reach out to either me or my colleague Daniel, and the contact details will be shown here on the screen any moment now. So reach out to us, but we'll also reach out to you with a follow-up email. And I see there are some questions in the Q&A channel. Can you please explain what the underlying data sets are? Yes, Josua, maybe you can explain that to the audience.
Sure, yes. So we use a lot of different data sets. Obviously, we are not disclosing all of them, but what I can say is our calculations are based on density functional theory, so quantum chemical simulations. And as a baseline, we use data sets such as Materials Project or Open Quantum Materials database, as well as our own calculations, and feed that into our database. And then on top of that, we do calculations of specific material properties. And some of the material properties are based on physical calculations, so using laws of physics to compute these properties. Some of them are based on machine learning. So we use machine learning algorithms, for instance, to calculate engineering properties, to calculate entropies that we need for the reactions. And some of the data is also based on stock exchange data, for instance, for the prices, as well as the data from wholesale suppliers that manufacture materials, as well as some data that we purchase. So, for instance, carbon footprint data we purchase from EcoInvent, which is, yeah, we have an agreement with them to be able to resell that data. So a lot of this went into it, years of development to build our database and to also build the calculation routines that are able to calculate your results so quickly.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question here. Are these our own machine learning models, or are we using available models in MedBench Discovery?
So we're not using MedBench Discovery. We're using a mixture of published models, so models that are published in the scientific literature, as well as our own models. So in some cases, we have applied our own models because we found out that we can actually be better in the accuracy than what was published. And in some cases, we said, okay, what was published already by scientists is the best that is possible. In that case, we use that. So we always make sure that you get the best models for your computations.
Any other questions? I see nothing in there at the moment. Oh, here's another one. As indicated in your website for the CO2 reduction example you collaborated on with DLR, did you include properties such as voltage, current density, or efficiency in your evaluation?
So for that specific project with DLR, what we did is, we looked at carbon capture materials, so materials that can capture CO2 from the air. And in that specific example, we didn't look at voltages. So we didn't look at an electrochemical process, but at a thermodynamic process. So for that's why these kind of properties are not included there. But yeah, that's what we have done in the specific example. To speak a bit more about the carbon footprint and the carbon reduction aspect. So we help you get more sustainable in a lot of different ways. One way is, of course, that the computational material screening requires a lot less experiments afterwards in a lab. So you reduce your energy demand and you reduce the chemical waste. But also we can help you find more efficient materials and materials with lower carbon footprint. And with that, of course, you have a lot of secondary effects that are even larger than the first one.
Another question here in the Q&A, have you validated the calculated data against experimental results to ensure accuracy and reliability?
Yes, we have done so. So in different ways. So for the density functional theory, this is already quite well-known data. So we are relying on data where it's very well documented in scientific literature what the limitations and shortcomings are. So that's why we feel very confident in the data already without even any experimental validations, because other people have done experimental validation of this data. And in other cases, for instance, in machine learning, we also train some of the machine learning models based on experimental data to get as close as possible to that data. And yeah, our customers so far have confirmed indeed that we were able to identify a lot of materials that are then also working in the end in the lab, of course. But also what's important to know is that what our platform does, the great value of it, is to narrow down the choice of materials. So the value is not just in identifying, okay, this material will have a connectivity of 15.7, but the value is if you're looking for a material that has a connectivity of 15, I'm just using a random example here, and our models predict a connectivity of 100, then we can exclude all of these materials because they're so far away from the target value that they don't come into question. So we narrow down the choice of materials. And of course, there are inaccuracies both in theoretical and in experimental data.
Thank you, Josua, and thank you everybody for your questions. It seems to be a topic of interest here, our demo webinar. And as I said, we're happy to answer any questions following. Just reply to an email you receive from me in the next couple of days. And with that, I'll close the webinar. Thanks again for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much and have a great day.